Good afternoon, good evening. How y'all doing? This is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is Rootwork here on the Black Liberation Media platform. It is Tuesday, May 13th, and on this particular Tuesday, we're coming at you again with the fourth installment. I believe it's number four. Anyway, it's the next installment of our series in um, conjunction with Cooperation Jackson, presenting the Build and Fight formula with Kali Akuno, co founder, co director of Cooperation Jackson, based in Jackson, Mississippi. This is the Build and Fight formula, again, coming to you on Tuesdays for the rest of the year. A radical transformation for society. This is the offering of Cooperation Jackson for activists, organizers, individuals who are interested in what they can do to not only help free us, but to free the planet in order to save the planet. So, because we have a lot of information to cover, I want to bring Kali Akuno up. But before we start talking to Kali Akuno, let me remind you all, please like, share, subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like this video before it ends. Share the link. If you're not subscribed to Black Liberation Media already, please subscribe to Black Liberation Media. Please subscribe to Cooperation Jackson's YouTube page, Jackson Rising, and please subscribe to my own page, Rootwork. You can find all of those on YouTube. So again, like, share, and subscribe. Hit some Cash Apps, hit some Venmos, hit all of that stuff. So Kali, I don't believe your mic is on. Welcome to the show again. Thank you again for putting together this series of shows detailing the build and fight formula. How you doing?
I'm doing good today. Doing
Good,
real
good,
good today.
good. All right, so let's jump into it, shall we? This is installment number four, I believe.
That's right, number four. And
Hmm.
today we are focusing on the need for worker self organization and self management to get us where we ultimately want and need to go. So that is going to be our focus today. Let me say off the top, let me just offer some recognition to some critical figures who made some valuable contributions to my own personal political development. And I think to the development of both the Black Liberation Movement and the organizing of the broad multinational working class in this empire. And that was Brother Tim Skimmerhorn, who passed, who was a leader of the rail workers in New York City. As a matter of fact, he helped to under his stewardship, his leadership of the union, led the last mass transit strike that happened in New York City, and he was a big supporter of Cooperation Jackson, and was always pushing us to kind of expand our practice in relating to the official kind of trade union movement, which we'll get into. And he was always keen to kind of highlight both to us and to others that cooperatives, of which we are more known for building, that cooperatives are just one tool in the toolkit of the working class to employ, uh, to own and control the means of production, and we'll be getting to that. So I just want to, for the official record, because we forget too often our sheroes and heroes, and so we want to lift them up. The other being Brother Saladin Muhammad, with Black Workers for Justice, who also passed not too long ago. And it should be noted that both of these brothers, or folks understand the history and the connection, come out of particularly the Black Liberation Movement and a tendency within that movement, of which I myself, uh, by way of family tree, if you would, come out of, and that was the African People's Party, the APP. And so, Saladin was instrumental in the Black Workers for Justice, which still exists, operating in North Carolina and beyond. Were very instrumental, I think, in raising the class consciousness of people like myself and I would say thousands of others who are trying to carry on this organizing work. So I just wanted to give shout outs to those two brothers, sorely missed, gone but not forgotten. That's a critical piece. And then also just to give some depth to some folks who made some contributions to this particular piece in the here and now. And that's a comrade of mine, Leaf Call, who was working in the ILW, the longshoremen up on the West Coast, and to K. Dole Griffin, who works with teachers and adjunct professors up in New York City. We have been working on papers and political positions for many, many years separately, and called on them to both send some feedback on some old ideas and to get their sense of kind of where what I'm gonna call, you'll hear me say this repeatedly, official kind of trade union movement is in the United States at present, and we'll go into why I use that term a little bit later. But just to jump into it a bit, I want to encourage all of you who are watching or who may watch this in the near future. We're not going to do a review today, but I just want to encourage everybody to go look at the first three episodes. First was just kind of making the case. The second one was about the critical need to start around building organic links in solidarity through mutual aid and social reproductive and care work. That was the first of the series. The second was on the need around food sovereignty, and we really focused that one in less so on the kind of the methods as we probably could have, just given the limitation of time, but more on how different communities could and should go about securing land so you can actually start engaging food production wherever you may be in the different ways, particularly here in the United States, that can go about. So go back and watch 1, 2, and 3 and spread the word. I think that there are some useful tools, and we're going to try to provide some again today. Now, getting us started on this one, we call this build and fight formula as a scaffolding formula, in that we want and need, in order for this to really build the kind of social and political powers necessary to kind of transform the world, we need these to build upon each other. And so let me just start by saying, building on those first episodes 2 and 3 in the series, that if you're engaged in mutual aid work and broad solidarity work in your community, you started to mobilize some people and get them organized and starting to do the kind of necessary care work and other aspects of social reproduction that are needed to sustain an ongoing organized drive. Critical thing is you mobilize some folks. The second piece is, we address the food sovereignty question on the backs of the mutual aid issue and the question, because from doing that work, hopefully we've done it in a manner wherever we may be, that we have ascertained more of the concrete kind of caloric, i.e. food needs that people in our community have. We've secured enough land. We are engaged in collective production on a mass scale, that we are both feeding feeding people what they need, making some aspects of their cost of living and expenses go down, improving their overall health by improving the diets, getting us out of this fast food, processed food, over a kind of indulgence that we are basically forced into, just given the nature of how food and food networks and food production value chains and supply chains are captured by major corporations. You've gotten out of that. But in the course of where it leads to this scaffold, in the course of doing that, you've largely organized people on a volunteer basis, because you can't really do anything like sell for market, particularly around food production, until you reach a particular level of scale. But the real object for what we're trying to do is get to a place where we are engaging in these things through mutual exchange, right? Labor, care work, exchange work, so that we can reduce our overall cost of living and amplify, the productive capacity that our little Mother Earth brings to bear. Now you've got people organizing in these fashions, but the critical thing is you aren't touching at this point where they work, right, to earn their living. Given that most of us in this society, roughly about 90% in one form or fashion, that is adults anyway, have to work for a living, right, to earn some wages, to earn some income, to be able to pay into the system of exploitation, which charges us rent, which charges money for food, for water, for power. We have to now figure out how to organize folks to exert greater power where they work, and I would argue ultimately how to control where they work. And that is why we say in this particular dimension of the formula, it's about worker self-organization and self-management. So critical pieces as to what that means. It means you're not being, number one, the self-organization. You're not relying on some outside force or government entity or some charity organization to come in and organize folks where you work. You're relying upon yourself and those who work at that place to do that organizing and to come up with the solutions that are necessary to exert power and ultimately to control the workplace. And that's the working conditions, the wages, and even we'll get to what you do when you work. Like if you're producing certain items, i.e., commodities for sale, what types of things do you actually produce and why, right? And before folks think that this is somewhat absurd, uh, uh, I'll get to the point that there are places, this is where the co-op side of it comes in, where workers do make certain democratic conditions, i.e. within the confines of the market as it currently exists. But one of the critical things that we are trying to aim to, I just want to state it directly, like one of the limitations of just doing cooperatives is that cooperatives can find better ways often to create better working conditions, oftentimes better wages, have better hours for workers to work at, and then they engage in the market, but they don't change in and of themselves. They don't change the market. We ultimately have to change the market and shift it so that it's more responsive to human needs rather than trying to fit a cycle of profitability and maximizing profits for a small group of property owners, including the places that we work. Right? So we're trying to get out of that. The piece around the self-management gets to this latter point of us not having to rely on a management class or a managerial class, right? Or the owners kind of dictating to us all the terms, conditions, hours, etc. But us doing that ourselves to determine how we live and under what conditions do we burden, if you would. These critical pieces of where we need to go if we're going to have really any serious opportunity at transforming this society. Because that is where the vast majority of, given the nature of how capitalism has reorganized society, that for us to make our living, we have to make and earn wages. And then spend those wages to secure the goods and the products that we need. Well, we want to change that. But it starts with us changing us and being in control of that process. Now, we have an uphill battle to climb, particularly in a place like the United States. And let's bring up, Tanya, a couple of graphics as to what type of challenges in the real we are confronting. And while that's coming up, we bring this up to just highlight that unions on a federal level have really only been kind of permissible and allowable since 1935. Now, there's exceptions to that rules in a number of different ways, but it was the National Labor Relations Act or the Wagner Act of 1935, which allowed workers to form a body that could do collective bargaining, form collective agreements and contracts. So it's only 1935 where that really comes into play. And since that time, right, unions have tried to organize in the United States. It's different in different countries, but today we're primarily going to deal with the United States. Um, have tried to organize, the working class primarily on a employment sector basis or employment basis, or a trade basis, i.e., the trade union piece, and to concentrate and build their membership and density around that. Now, that was a set of agreements that the Wagner Act kind of instructed that locked us into a framework that I'm gonna just say I was gonna get to this later, but I'll say it now. Ultimately, in this day and age, we need to jettison, we need to abandon, we need to get rid of, because it's forming more of a limitation to our organizing abilities than it is an enabling factor. And we'll get into why a little bit later. But I want everybody to just, take a good look at this map. This is from 2023. Uh, and I deliberately chose one that did not, center on 2025 because it would look even worse. And in 2025, it is changing even more rapidly on account of what the Trump regime is doing via the instrument of Doge, the so-called Department of, what was it, Government
Efficient.
Efficiency, right? Efficiency.
Mhm.
Their slash and burn instrument, where they particularly are just taking an axe to public sector workers and gutting those unions. And we'll come back and talk about some of the deeper effects when we look at this. But if you look at this, you look at that the Hawaii, which is one of the smallest states geographically and population wise in the empire, has the highest concentration of unit density. And
Mhm.
if you look there, it only scratches 25% of the working class in Hawaii, which means that 75% are unorganized in an official capacity. That is not leverage. Does not constitute bargaining power, except for in small, rare cases where there's often specialized work, where workers have a degree of control and or a monopoly, where they can kind of bring some demands to bear on their employers, because it takes them a while to train new electricians or new engineers, or uh, new carriers to deal with the postal codes and things of that nature. You can't just pluck people into some of these jobs automatically and think they're going to be competent at doing them. They often take training and development, right? So that gives you a bit of leverage in terms of negotiating kind of with your employer. But as you can see, if you're only doing 25% out of 100, you don't have much leverage. The 75% are actually going to limit the scale of what you can demand in terms of wages and other forms of compensation like health care or paternal or maternal leave or child care assistance. Those things wind up being very limited. And if you look at this map, it is not by accident that the places where the Republicans dominate the scene have the lowest concentration of union density. That is not by accident. There's a long period of organization on behalf of the Republicans and their reactionary forces in those states, and even laws that they passed. Like the Taft-Hartley law, which was passed in 1947, which enabled what we call the right to work regime, that enables states to kind of opt out of certain sections of the National Labor Relations Act or condition it in certain kind of ways to give more power to the states and therefore the employers, and therefore the kind of historically the dominant elements of the white ruling class, be they old plantation owners or old industrialists, which is still fundamentally the case. And if you look at the places that made state efforts to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, it mirrors the same map. So you're dealing with the systemic nature of racism and white domination in this society that we are trying to and have to work to undo. So I want you to go to the next one because I think it highlights a particular fact that we need to kind of contend with. And this is an important one. So that top line, right, if you look at it, is the total kind of density of union membership if you and by year. So if you look at it, the major spike and in the overall number of members, of people in unions, it spiked between 1970, really the mid 1970s, and early 1980s, and then it's been just on a steady decline since.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, some of the last figures that I've looked at, each successive year since 2019 is organized labor has each year brings new catastrophic lows into the number of people who are in trade unions. And if you look at the two bottom lines,
Mm-hmm.
what those track, right? The lighter color tracks organized forces in the private sector, right? That would be in your today's, Amazon or Walmart, the mega multinational corporations that exist and work in the private sector. Uh, uh, that has been on a steady and rapid decline. And
Mm-hmm.
if you look at those who are in the public sector, that has been a slow but a somewhat steady increase. And it kind of flattens out around 2020 for a number of different factors, the pandemic being one. But if you look at it as of just within the last, 3 months, right? February, March, April, just those in 3 months with the bull in the China shop kind of figures that Trump administration has done in terms of gutting federal employees, you would see probably a marked drop. And it's critical that in the private sector, where most employment in the United States is kind of centered, right? And just for the record, the United States, as much as the kind of capitalist propagandists want to talk about the private sector and the efficiency of the private sector, and then more things need to be within the private sector. Almost all of these things are dependent in one form or fashion on government largesse. I'm using their language, i.e., the tax base that me and you have to cough up every day, every week, every year in order to fund what should be public goods and services, which oftentimes go to these multinational corporations in the way of exclusive contracts or kickbacks, similar to what Elon Musk is getting with his SpaceX program, with his everything. I'm gonna leave that alone, but just we need to come to a particular point of understanding really how the U.S. government and the U.S. economy actually work to reinforce each other, and why this tariff war, this trade war that Trump is executing, presents such a challenge to the working class in particular, and how much hurt it's going to kind of toll that's going to be extracted on all of us, and why this building fight formula I think comes at an opportune time of us setting ourselves in position to exploit the contradictions that these policies and practices kind of force upon us to kind of take it more of our own hands to control the economic and social dynamics in our immediate communities and through a federated sense, to then extract that out to larger and larger kind of aggregates where we ultimately wind up controlling more of the economy. But it depends on our ability to do this type of organizing. So if you go to the next one, Tanya, I want to move just real quickly through a couple of these and then get to it. And this kind of highlights some of the pieces that uh, wanted folks to just really look at. The now this doesn't cover everything in its broad sectors, but if you look at it, the highest sector of union concentration right now is in the public sector. And if you notice, there's a little asterisk by there. And you didn't get to see this form, I will put it in the links. But that asterisk notes that includes police people, firemen, etc. Right, in the public sector. Remind you, those are public sector workers, and that is why it's 33%. Next are teachers in our public schools, 33.1%, so just slightly lower than the other one, which is around public safety, quote unquote. And then the next highest is in utilities. Most of those are also, to a degree, highly regulated, if not controlled, as public utilities. So the overwhelming part of the green is where the movement, the official trade union movement, is now. It's very heavily concentrated in and around government employee. And that is one of the reasons why Trump is taking the axe to those, because it's not like they are really saving any money, which is part of what their claim is. It's not like they are finding any corruption, and what they are calling corrupt are just things that they don't agree with. I hope folks are very clear with that. They don't agree with employing black people. They don't employ. They don't agree with employing Latinos. They don't agree with employing too many women. They do not agree with employing queer people. And anybody who does employ them are somehow, according to their logic, engaged in corruption. Uh, but the critical piece, if you go to the next slide, I want folks to really gather in on this. Uh, Union membership by sex and race, right? The largest group of folks in this country who are officially in the trade union movement are black people, right? And this is comparing 2 years, and it is noting a drop, right, in union density from the cuts that were being made during the first Trump administration. So in 2018, black union membership was 12.5, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In 2019, the close of that year, it was 11.2. So a full point and some change down. And then if you look at the next large in terms of rising, right, by race, is white and then Latino, i.e., Hispanic within this chart. Um, None of these are that high. None of these are that good by terms of standards of what workers can extol in terms of higher wages and better working conditions from being part of National Labor Relations Act recognized entities, i.e., these unions. And it's only gotten worse and it's gotten intentionally worse. But one of the critical things, just want to highlight about this particular piece, and you go back, you look and you compare where folks are primarily employed. I want everybody to understand that a large part of the federal government workforce, that is the area where black people, particularly black women, are most heavily concentrated. So this is not a race neutral program that is being executed. It is being executed for very clear political, kind of historic lines to attack certain communities and their political affiliation, knowing that the vast majority of black women in this country are supporters of the Democratic Party, i.e., the opposition to Trump. So this is a concerted program to destroy his opposition and destroy the organized force that might have some power and capacity to challenge their program, particularly in a systemic basis, by not complying with certain orders or slowing the machine down in their execution. They were very crafty and very smart in going after these particular sectors. And this, be mindful that the Republicans and even some Democrats never wanted public sector employees ever unionized to begin with, right? And that was a fight, and it took a while for that to even be recognized. And if you read it, the National Labor Relations Act in its original form did not include public sector workers. It was just those in the quote unquote the private sector, which was always minimal within the United States. So showing these figures is kind of showing, in some respects, just the cold reality of what we have to deal with. And the main argument I want to bring to bear and want everybody to grapple with, and to many who might listen to this who are in the trade unions, it might sound somewhat uh, anathema to the logic by which uh, uh, the movement kind of runs through, and that we need to appeal to the legality of what we're doing. But we have to remember both the age in which we are in, right? And we are confronting fascism on a global scale, not just in the United States, and we're confronting it because of the deep shortcomings and contradictions of the capitalist system on a global scale, right? Its inability to reproduce itself and to secure the kind of profit margins that it wants and ultimately that it really needs in order to survive and keep the machine going that has been running short now for decades. And when capital can't produce how it wants to produce, when it can't rule by force of persuasion, it resorts to outright open coercion, and that's what leads to them calling on the dogs, and that's the era in which we live now, right, on a global scale. And so we are going to have to really dig deep, as Tim would say, into the toolkit to figure out how we're going to fight back against their political kind of machinations, if you would, but also more importantly, to engage in the broader dynamic of where the system itself is running short of meeting our fundamental needs. And one of the critical things, to note that we should learn and must learn, just as a class, coming from our recent experience, and I'm talking about the experience of the pandemic, right? It is a problem when some critical items are only produced in one or two countries, and those one or two countries are half a world away. This is not China bashing by any stretch of the imagination. I want folks to understand that. But our little project, Cooperation Jackson, in the height of the pandemic in our community, like in March and April, when we first started feeling the real effects of COVID-19, and we first started feeling those effects with some of our members who were houseless, just stopped showing up to our programs, and then later find out some weeks and months later that due to inadequate, sanitary conditions, due to the lack of personal protective PPE equipment, that they had no masks, no gloves, no hand sanitizer, that they died from exposure to COVID 19. And our community, like most of yours, and those of you in the United States anyway, you remember beginning in April, there started to be shortage of the was it the M90 masks, right?
95. Yeah.
M95 masks. Why? Because the vast majority of those are produced in China, and under the terms and conditions to kind of halt the spread of the disease, there were major initiatives, largely agreed upon almost unanimously by most governments of the world, to suspend trade, to suspend travel, so those ships just piled up. And but that meant that there was acute shortages in communities such as ours, poor, impoverished, Black working class communities, and folks were dying. So we took it upon ourselves to start making masks. and wind up being in a capacity to make a critical impact in saving. We'll never know the actual figures, but the fact that we were able to give out thousands of masks, primarily to folks in our community, particularly houseless folks, we know we made a critical difference in making an intervention just by the number of people who did not die who were within our purview. And so I'm highlighting this from a direct experience on highlighting the need, and goes back to the community, or goes to the community production piece, which is our next one that we're going to do, issue number 5. Why we need to look to kind of relocalize certain aspects of production to not be dependent upon ultra vulnerable and hyper overextended supply and value chains to meet our particular needs. And let's understand, despite all the Trumpian rhetoric, how those value chains got created. Because he tells a story that the presidents before him were stupid, and that they allowed the United States to be abused and to be exploited, etc. Do not believe one word of that at all. Please, anybody, particularly the folks looking at this. Because what happened was the corporations and the capitalists which run this economy decided to go to places like China or Vietnam, Taiwan or Mexico or Chile, Argentina, because the labor costs were lower, the environmental standards were lower, or they didn't exist, and so they found populations and or created situations in various countries where they could better exploit the labor that existed in these regions. And they made these critical decisions beginning in the 1960s to counter everything you saw in those graphics and the curve in the upswing of working class forces getting better organized, exerting more power, more influence, and control to kind of inhibit or distort, if you would, or shape the labor process, what got produced, when, under what terms, under what conditions, and then all that impacted the profitability. The capitalist system itself, Trump is making kind of somewhat a deranged anti-capitalist argument in what he's arguing. It's an argument that is not fundamentally understanding the overall relations of productions. It's a mafioso argument of just kind of extolling tribute and extract. If we look at, in fact, what he's doing right now in his trip through Southwest Asia, in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf states, he's just extracting tribute, basically, right? He went there. He said to us all that he went there because they were willing to pay, and that was a condition of his foreign diplomacy, and that they were willing to, think in the case of Saudi Arabia, buy $1 trillion worth of U.S. goods, largely in the weapons arms trade, which is one of the only areas where the United States, probably that and entertainment, are the only areas where it kind of has a dominant kind of a positionality within the overall, productive relations and productive cycles in the United States. So, not playing into the same rationality or the same reasoning why he's trying to, quote unquote, bring production back to the United States. Our logic and their logic, even though they may sound the same, I want folks to understand, and why I went on this road, that what the critical difference is. We are trying to create a system wherein the fundamental goods and services that we need are not dependent upon highly vulnerable supply chains and value chains, nor will they be contingent upon exploiting labor in other countries under extremely severe conditions. Knowing the other part of the story about U.S. capital shipping their factories over to China, Vietnam, Mexico, etc., also had to do with them through the CIA and other things creating favorable regimes, right? Taking out the legitimate leftist governments, if you want to call that, any nation state a legitimate entity, but taking them out. Um, and you can just look at the track record of CIA interventions and assassinations and regime change operations all over the world, especially from the 1940s through the present. It is deep, is replete, and covers almost every square inch of the planet. That they created terms and conditions, they created regimes which would basically subject their workers to the most, depraved, depressed working standards and conditions. It's not like folks chose to be cheap labor. The conditions of capitalists through colonialism and imperialism created these conditions very intentionally and deliberately, and it's up to us to unchange that. So uh, we are making that argument. Number one, that in the here and now, if we want to really advance and change the fortunes of labor, that one of the critical things in the United States that we have to do is really organize outside of the narrow confines of the National Labor Relations Act. We need to jettison that and its logic entirely and recognize the nature of the age that we are in and what type of organization it requires, right? Because it's not like capital; these corporations are operating within the confines of this law. They've done everything within their power to break the law, subvert the law, and they have very successfully. They've employed and new forms of technology to reorganize the entire productive process that we, at this point, have to adapt to and catch up with, and create new forms of organization that deals with how the productive process itself is currently being run and operated. And we don't just want to catch up, we want to be ultimately in the driver's seat. And so, one of the critical things that we want to bring together is noting that we don't just want workers to organize unions to just bargain and barter for better conditions. It's insufficient, folks. We need to be thinking of how do we organize ourselves in such a manner that ultimately we are trying to cooperatize and socialize the entire productive process, starting with these particular enterprises and turning them into worker-owned co-ops that can then federate and change. And that's a long way away. We're speaking to kind of what would be. Uh, uh, but we have to recognize that the existing trade union structure is basically being destroyed. Although that we're in a period where there seems to be a small deal of revival, but that revival, at best, is still only it's going to reach about in its current form about 20 to 25% of the working class that are in certain sectors that are being targeted and what folks think are organized or that can be organized. So we have to go beyond that framework, and we have to really look at organizing folks on a new basis, right? And organizing people at the points of production where surplus value is being made, but also at the various points of service, right? Where people are providing counseling or healthcare work or aid work. We have to go into organize folks in all of these different fashions in a critical way, and organize them on a class-based basis, not a sector-based basis, but a class-based basis. This is not particularly what I'm arguing. I want folks to understand is not inherently new. This is in the U.S. history, and to an extent in the global history. Uh, Aspects of what we're arguing for could be found in the organizing kind of orientation and model of in the industrial workers of the world, the WABIs, the IWW, and even before that in the United States and Knights of Labor. A very class-based oriented, not the kind of dumpers, specialized AFL-CIO, which he was the president of, trade sector basis. We have to move beyond that if we're going to be able to be in a position to really push capital and push the government to go in a new direction. And we want to argue, and we will perhaps in some more detail, we're running out of time now, the need to start organizing on this basis, starting with, again, that scaffolding. So if we're doing the mutual aid work and the food sovereignty work in our communities, we start at that level of organizing. We want to organize in places where we live, in a place like Jackson, where we want to start by organizing everybody who has to earn a living, to make a wage, by making a wage, everybody within one big union, and create broad, as a kind of a critical step, creating broad community-based union shops or organized shops that then collectively deal with changing the terms and conditions under which we labor and what we produce. That is the critical model that we want to really put forward. And the critical piece to this, we would argue, just in closing, that we have to build uh, the relationship in the here and now to move us in this direction, where we're not just vying for better working conditions, but trying to actually, appropriate and then repurpose such a socialize the means of production, and getting those who are in the trade union movement to work towards, like I said, cooperativizing these instances. We have to form a partnership that brings unions and co-op together. We've been calling this our union co-op initiative. It's been a major struggle, but it's something we have to ultimately do on a local level to get many of the trade unions to kind of buy into it. But it's a critical piece that we have to move into, to re-articulate the power of the working class in this country, and not, view it as just kind of a small sector activity, but a comprehensive activity that encompasses us all. And for that to do that, where we start, and we'll share these tools. We need to build class conscious cooperatives as a critical base, and we need to build class conscious unions and have them work in a strategic framework, first at the local level, then at the county-wide level, and I'm staying within the kind of a U.S. framework of logic, then at the state, and then ultimately at a empire-wide or national-wide level, and building upon that piece. This is the next critical piece in this scaffold, y'all, that we want to really highlight. There's more details, which we will kind of outline by sharing these tools and resources and putting more resources up both on our website and social media in the coming days and weeks. But just wanted to leave you all with this basic framework as a starting point that we can build upon. So I'll stop there, Tanya, and leave it open for questions.
Is this what you're talking about? What's on the screen?
That's right. Core element, right? And there's two components. There's the building class conscious cooperatives, which we did some 2 years ago. And even though we've been deeply involved in our municipality, in our city, in our state, in the broader southern region, and trying to make connections with various trade unions with varying degrees of success, this has always been a core part of what we've articulated as the build and fight formula, from the beginning. And why you saw those who started in the masthead, why you saw, one of the scenes of our May Day program. And, I just want to iterate to everybody, it was not by accident that Cooperation Jackson was officially born on May Day 2014. That was very intentional. We've always had in mind that we want to bring these two kind of fractured forms of organizing amongst the working class together, and to make it very clear that we've always viewed our cooperative activity as just being a tool within the toolkit. Again, borrowing from Brother Skimmerhorn, from Tim, that we always saw an aim for us to be connected on a broad class basis. But we started on our account in a place like Jackson to organize sectors of the class, which could not, within the limited scope of the economy as it exists and the lack of jobs, we had to start where there are concrete needs in our community, to create the employment that was needed and to create the conditions. And we know these conditions exist in almost every community that exists within the United States because uh, uh, Jackson and some other southern cities may be the problem may be more acute than say exists in Los Angeles where you are, Tony, or some other folks on the coastal cities where the real unemployment around Jackson, we would argue, is probably around at any given day somewhere between 30 and 50%, far beyond what the official labor statistics say that it's only like 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 for Black people, whatever the situation is. We know how they even count those figures is grossly inaccurate because they only count folks who are continuing to search for work and not those who just decided to kind of give up or make their living through the underground economy, which is growing and has been growing basically since the 1960s in this country. So that was an intentional piece that we want to kind of anchor on and look hopefully at us as kind of a living model. But it's some work trying to work with the trade unions and their leadership to kind of see some things in a different manner. And despite sometimes being rejected or not taken seriously because our numbers are not similar to their numbers, in terms of scope and scale of work, it's a quest that we cannot quit on because at the end of the day, we need each other. And we are very clear that the model that we have been employed has increasingly has diminishing returns. And so, the trade union model, we have to think beyond the bounds of that. And that's why we're pushing very clearly, despite all the, kind of the dangers and the threats that may come with acting people to abandon the National Labor Relations Acts and all the quote unquote kind of protections that it somewhat affords, to recognize that that act is now antiquated and does not meet in any fundamental way the needs of what the class ultimately has to have to exercise and exert any power and survive. And let me just say this one thing because it leads into the next one. Just to leave a tease, we now live in an era where uh, if if uh, the tech lords can really get their mass computing programs, which they call AI, right? They're mass computational programs to actually do some independent calculations that lean them into a direction of what we would call kind of thinking, making autonomous decisions. Then they will be able to employ robotics and the other different forms of automation that have deeply already been employed to do labor replacement on a mass scale. So we're dealing with the threat on a generational basis that uh, workers on a whole may become obsolete in the next 15 to 20 years. That is, if these folks are allowed to determine uh, what direction this technology heads and in whose interest it serves. And I'm not anti-tech, nor is our argument. And that's why we're arguing for community production. But we need to be in control of that process and make sure that artificial intelligence, I'm going to use their language in this case, that if artificial intelligence is actually created and employed, that is created and employed by the logic of the broad socialization that humanity needs to lighten the burden of our labors as opposed to maximizing profit. But we have to basically seize control of this process in order to ensure that it heads in that direction and not in the direction that it's presently headed. So we got a mighty task ahead of us. But if you take just the basic evidence serious, you'll see that I'm not playing and that it is urgent. It is dire that we get ahead of this in real time before they just start eliminating large swaths of humanity, which we need to be fully cognizant of, is actually a large part of their thinking, particularly what some people call the PayPal mafia, or the South African troika of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, and I forget the other one's name, who was in the PayPal mafia. They come from South Africa. They all serious about planning and executing for extinction level events. And going to Mars is not just some fantasy or fabrication of theirs, something they're actively thinking and constructing. And we have to elevate our collective thinking in a manner that's not just about countering what they are doing. That's one dimension of what's happening. But we also have to really figure out, how do we regenerate the productive capacity of this little planet that we are on, right? Because we don't know, and this comes from my comrade Leaf in particular, because we're not engaged in deep regenerative practices, and capital fundamentally the last 500 years has not oriented this way or allowed it. It's just extraction. Because we haven't kind of tried to extend the development of the biomass, we're not really sure what all the earth can produce, but we know it can produce a bounty if the things are in right relationship to regenerate themselves in terms of the soils, in terms of the capacities of the ocean. This planet could probably produce a lot more, but we have to create the system and the relations that will allow that.
Let's go through some of these briefly. Let's go through some of these remaining slides you've got, Kali, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will, just to put up, folks. We are this latest set of pieces that we put. As I mentioned, we did the class conscious kind of cooperatives and what that entails back in 2023. We just produced these class conscious kind of unionism, and kind of arguing what that really fundamentally entails and what we need to do, because there's some critical things we got to be mindful of, and why we are articulating this, right? So let me just go by one way of an example. Some of the different trade unions, particularly some of the auto workers, some of the comments from Sean Fain, who is the president of United Auto Workers, they've offered some mixed messages, I would say, relative to Trump's tariffs. Some similar arguments to ours around the need to kind of relocalize in production, which I think we should kind of get behind to a degree. But being in favor of the tariffs to accomplish that, and somehow kind of aligning yourself with some dimension of the goals of the Trump administration, we need to be very mindful, and I think push back on some of the sectors of organized labor for endorsing, because we need to be very clear. Trump can make arguments about reindustrializing the United States, but the capitalist class that he's relying upon to execute that, should investment in production be redirected in that way, rest assured that is going to be automated. So it's not like they will be hiring tens of thousands of new workers. They'll be employing tens of thousands of new machines. So it's not in the current case, it would not be a boom for U.S. workers. It would be kind of a net effect, because we haven't won at the point of production new terms and conditions. And so that's what we need to. And what this kind of articulating is, in the form as you read it, why anyone thinking of forming developing a trade union from scratch, which there's a lot of young activists, which I applaud, particularly a lot of folks in the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, are aiming in that direction. If these things are not really built on a solid anti-imperialist basis, on a solid anti-racist basis, on a solid, anti-sexist basis, anti-homophobic basis, then we are just leaving the door for various mechanisms of the employers, of the capitalists, to come in and divide the working class and determine, who eats, who doesn't eat, who get a job, who doesn't get a job, and under what conditions. So we have to be in clear solidarity with each other on all the basis of the diversity of which the class exists, which is, not only multiracial, multinational. It is profoundly replete with different languages, different religions, different sexual orientations, and we have to be very mindful about embracing all of that in its diversity. Otherwise, we are just kind of sowing our own defeat. So this kind of outlines some of the logic and reasoning behind that, so that we could pull ourselves together and fight as effectively as possible, and not be both blindsided by jingoism and American nationalism or other forms of nationalism that ultimately divide the class. And I just want to say, for folks to be clear, I'm not a class reductionist by any stretch of the imagination. Be very mindful of that when listening to me. Uh, uh, and in fact, I'm one who often articulates, we need to do the most to highlight and accentuate the various kind of cultural differences that exist. Not They don't inherently divide anything. That's not the problem. We have to recognize that our different cultures reflect the different ways by which all of our peoples historically have come to try to organize themselves on this little planet and survive. And I'm gonna borrow from Amiri Baraka on this one. All of our cultures have democratic elements, and all of them have reactionary elements, right? But to strive towards a broad universal, bringing all these elements together, we're trying to incorporate the full richness and the full depth of the human experience and human knowledge, and bring that to the table. And like every time a language dies, and I think there's something like 50 of them die a day now on our planet. You are eliminating, or we collectively to a degree are eliminating whole branches of human knowledge and accumulated experience to disappear. Knowledge that could help us in new medical fields, new science fields, that just we are allowing to disappear. That we need to make sure we capture and incorporate to enhance what we know, right, and to expand what we know and what we're capable of. So that's a different orientation than a reductionist one, which I do not employ. We need to highlight and learn from our broad diversity. I think that's the critical way in which we need to go, and how we have to orient ourselves in this particular work.
Okay, what is this slide talking about? Well, this is the practices of the.
Yeah, that one, I just would offer again. We've been offering this basically as a short form summary for folks who kind of want a good bird's eye view on some of the critical things that can, and we would argue should be done in this period, to not only, fight back successfully and put ourselves in a new position, but ultimately to kind of lay the seeds of creating kind of a new society. And the aim is for these things to work again in conjunction with each other, not just in isolation. And we do that, not that everybody, is going to become some new master at farming, or some new master in technology. But we need to be in relationship with folks who are mastering those skills, and to be working in broad democratic fronts and practices to accentuate that, to change how we relate. As I was going back to the beginning, how do we relate to the market? Like, and ultimately, how do we dictate it so profit is not driving, what we need to exchange the goods and services we all need to kind of live and thrive by, but that the principles of equity are driving that. That's a critical piece of what we're trying to get at in kind of this summary of these practices of position, as we call it. We haven't done, and probably just to be clear, the other side of the building fight formula, which we're going to get to basically starting, I think, in October at this pace, uh, highlights some of the different things that, once we got to a broad kind of mass level, what could be done to reshift, and what ultimately have to be done to reshift society. So, how and under what terms and conditions might we be able to employ, for instance, like a general strike, right, to then bring about situations where there's a actual dual power crisis that we create, that we determine, and then what do we ultimately want to do about reshaping society. I would argue that the contradictions that are being unleashed, particularly at accelerated pace by Trump and the forces of MAGA, offer us a profound more opportunity if we get our act together than just posing as a threat. Now, if we don't get organized, then they constitute, an existential threat without question, which they clearly aim to do. But their logic does not work to serve their own membership base, if you want to call it that, their own movement, right? And you see kind of the twist in the logic. On the one hand, Trump, for instance, uh, uh, signed some new executive order that people are still trying to understand around lowering medical costs, right? And saying that I think one section of it said that the cost of the drug would have to be the lowest of wherever it is, and in some states, given taxes and other things, pay more for certain medicines than others. So he's trying to standardize that. Now, that's to a degree kind of a backhand nod towards creating universal health care. So he's trying to appeal one sector of his base, the working class sector of his base, to make certain things cheaper. But that means alienating the folks who occupied the dais with him when he did his inauguration, right? Because medicine is one of the most big pharma is one of the most profitable industries within the United States. Not profitable on the side of production, because as we are learning right now, most folks are learning right now, most of your core medicines are produced in China. But the patents on those medicines is where the profit is being made, or who can produce what. Like I myself am dependent upon a medicine where there is no generic form of it, given how the patent and the license of it is. And if I didn't qualify for a particular discounted rate, I'd have to pay like $800 for 30 pills per month, right? And so that is where they make their profits. And believe me, they fully intend to make their profits. That's why Obamacare is structured in the way that it is, because the Democrats did not want to really fight big pharma in the end and kind of break their stranglehold over our health care. And so you had this, forcing, initially trying to force everybody into a market like you would have. Everybody's forced to basically kind of have car insurance and other forms of insurance, to trying to force us into that and saying that the market would provide. Well, we know now the insurance companies from some 12 years of that existing now, that most in a lot of states like Mississippi, most of the big insurance just opt out. So the only thing that's really available to you is the government program, or a more pricey private sector one if you can afford it. So it winds up meaning a good chunk of people in Mississippi are actually now fully going without health care, despite some bill that was allegedly created to universalize it. So, they're both of these parties are their logic don't add up, and just leads to more contradiction. We have to intervene in that contradiction and exploit people to come up with our own autonomous solutions. That's what this overall argumentation in the formula is trying to provide.
All righty. I'm not seeing a lot of questions. I'm seeing a lot of comments, but not a lot of questions in the chat. So, any other graphics you want me to get to, or let's just call it?
No, I just want to just right now,
No other graphics?
everybody, no, thank everybody for just kind of attending. Be on the lookout for more documents, highlighting our particular argument around this and framework. The first one that'll be up on our website, cooperationjackson.org, will be this, what we are arguing that it takes to build class conscious unions. Then the other piece is how these two things come together and must come together. But I want to just lay the groundwork and ask folks to join us next on June 10th for a deeper examination around community production. I will do my best, and I won't be different than this one, to do my best to get someone I consider to be, my teacher around this. That's Brother Blair Evans, to join us in the conversation to really break down uh, uh, how the tools and techniques of digital fabrication will enable us to do community production at scale. We'll highlight some of the things that his organization, Insight Focus, is doing up in Idlewild and up in Detroit, and what we've been trying to like copy and learn from and iterate on in Jackson. So be on the lookout for that, and a deeper kind of argument on how and why we can relocalize production and do it through this technique in a way which is ecologically sound, and becoming more so as we become more self-conscious and self-aware and self-directed in directing this process and guiding where the technology can go and should go, and while we're encouraging everybody who's within our earshot to take this up and start adopting it in your community to get ahead of it, so we wind up determining how these new kind of technologies and productive forces can be used. And I want everybody, there's a book on Neil Gershenfeld. I may get the title wrong right now, but How to Produce Almost Anything. Look it up. I believe it's out of print, but you can find it's still really accessible in a number of different stores. Check that out as prep for our next session, because a lot of what will be going on, whether it's just me by myself or me and Blair, will be based upon our work. That's a book that he also contributed to, and it does a good argumentation, laying out the basis of some of what I just argued for. So check that out and be on the lookout and join us on the 10th. And meanwhile, just to tell everybody, make sure to pass on the word about the series. Tell your friends to watch the video, to like, and to subscribe to our different channels. And we'll go from there. Anything you want to do to close out, Tanya?
I saw one question you answered earlier in terms of police unions. There's another question of, are you going to be at the National Black Radical Organizing Conference coming up in Indianapolis?
I
But this,
will be there. One of the
okay,
Cooperation Jackson is, one of the principal organizing forces of it. We're going to be, making our argument there. We're going to be presenting a lot of the materials that you have here. The summary form
okay,
pieces will be in the handouts, and we'll be making, our argument in particular that I'll just state it here because I'm going to state it there. We want to move as many of the folks who are going to come there to become adherents of promoting and practicing and implementing this build and fight formula in their communities. This is a concrete thing that we want to take and get people to employ and iterate and do. So we'll be laying some of this out there when we get the opportunity. We'll be one of the plenaries and some of the breakout groups. So be on the look for us there.
at the
Yeah, at the program, and if you haven't registered, register quickly. We are basically, I think, pretty much at capacity. We may only be
500
taking people.
people have
Yeah,
registered.
we may only be taking people from Indianapolis at this point,
Mhm.
local folks. But one of the pieces that we are talking about, not everything will be shared live. It doesn't need to be. But the pieces where there will be, some recordings or a live stream, I'm going to be on one of the committees to ensure that takes place, so we can reach as many people as possible.
Last question. I think it's obvious, but I'm going to go on and give the person the floor. Beyond today's focus on organizing labor, do you consider the possibility of our stopping to support the Democratic Party, which takes us for granted, and building our own independent political force?
Yes, I'll reiterate again and again, and thank you for that, Mario. Uh, the Democratic Party is the graveyard of social movements. Nothing that we have articulated in any form or fashion calls on folks to be involved or be dependent upon the Democratic Party. This all needs to be organized outside of that vehicle. And if I had more time, if we had more time, uh, would have made more of an argument that the principle within this framework around working class self-organization and self-management means that also the working class has to engage in its own political, autonomous political pursuits and leadership, which means forming our own political instruments, not becoming adjuncts of the Democratic Party, of which most, of the trade unions, basically since the 1930s, have been, and that is a dead end. I would argue from the beginning, it's been kind of a dead end piece. But we have to, if we're being real, and we always need to be, we need to understand that we are still living with some of the dynamics of how the Democratic Party, or both parties, but it was bipartisan, but to understand the Democratic Party's role in purging the left from the organized trade union movement, particularly in the 1940s and 50s. In the MacArthur era, where they went at socialists and Communist Party in particular, the different Trotskyist formations that were deep in organized labor, and basically liquidated them out of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations. If you're not up on that history, I would definitely advise you to get into it, and even look at how some of the history of how the IWW, the Wobblies, were attacked in an earlier generation by both parties and eliminated. So if we're going to do this, and we have to do this, we're going to have to do this through our own political instruments. Just make that fundamentally clear. And, to understand that historically, groups like the IWW, they executed and built their own political parties on a local level, and even the CIO in its early days, many of its unions, the working class engaged in independent political activity. So this is not new; it just hasn't been carried through substantively. But this is an argument that we are going to have to make that accompanies our argument with the established and official trade unions, and why they need to break and join in a broader organizing process. So just be clear of what I'm advocating for, and what Cooperation Jackson is advocating for is something wholly outside of the Democratic Party, completely. No dependence on it, no reliance on it. And as you noted, it does everything it can at the end of the day to subvert us, and it spends more of its time actually destroying its left flank than it does, even now, actually destroying its left flank than it does fighting its more authoritarian and racist cousins in the Republican Party. I mean, so much so that I saw so early on social media today that the young guy, I forget his name, unfortunately, but the young guy who just kind of won office in the DNC, who was part of the school shootings, a victim of one of the school shootings in Florida, was trying to is trying to make an effort to reorganize the DNC and challenging. Well, the DNC basically is upending and overturning his election because they will not allow the forces of the left, from reformers to revolution, and they will not allow them enough space to dictate the policy of that party, point blank. It is a neoliberal party, and anybody who doesn't ascribe to that, you will be brought in, but you won't be heard, you won't be given a voice, and you definitely would not be allowed to organize on your own terms.
Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson, thank you again for coming to Black Liberation Media and to Rootwork to present this series. Thank you all for hanging with us, for hanging in there watching. Again, if you have not done so, please like, share, and subscribe. There's a Cash App going down on the screen that's for supporting the work of Cooperation Jackson. Like, share, subscribe, support the work, tell folks about the series, and get organized the best way you can, the best way you know how. If you can come to Indiana with folk, come on down. So that's
And
all I got.
Indiana is a gathering point in this process.
Right. One of them, many.
Like part of it is being mindful, just so folks understand, trying to build on the legacy and extend the legacy of what happened in Gary, Indiana, in 1972. So kind of building on that, not forgetting that, but also not being presidential, how that effort was subverted by the Democratic Party and by the Congressional Black Caucus. So there's, the past. We have to learn from the past. So that's why I'm bringing that up, because there's some key lessons there of how the National Black Independent Political Party, of which some of our folks created, was subverted in that process and undermined and left us with the void that we are still trying to fill, and we aim to fill it this time around as best we can.
All right, y'all. That's it for now. Thank you again, and we will catch you on the next one. Peace.